Gosh, I thought this was supposed to be a debate because I only disagree with you on one issue, which is efficiency, which I hope somebody asks a question about. But I was looking for more of a Donnybrook, but I don't think we're going to have it. And one of the things I want to say is I'm noted for saying some very nasty things about conventional economics, but I have no problem with most of what's given as economics here, because I think people in the financial community are constrained by reality as opposed to academic economists. Oh, good, at least one here. Now, I'm a natural scientist. I'm trained in physics and chemistry and biology and geology and all that stuff, hydrology, and I'm an ecologist, a systems ecologist. And I wrote this paper in 2001, The Need to Reintegrate the Natural Sciences with Economics. And I promised I promised Jan that I wouldn't say really nasty things about economists. So you're going to hear from me while I'm holding my fire. Now, but I will say one thing. I am basically a university teacher, and I teach freshmen too. And if freshmen came up to me and proposed neoclassical economics to me as a concept, I would give them an A for imagination, but I would give them an F for science. Because if you're a natural scientist and you look at the basic foundations of neoclassical economic thought, they just don't hold. And for example, in the second half of the last century, we came up with, Thomson, Kelvin, and everybody came up with the laws of thermodynamics, which transformed first chemistry, then physics. It transformed all sciences except one. It didn't touch economics. And if you asked a natural scientist, how do you make something like economic goods and services, well, they'd scratch their head and they'd wiggle around a little bit and think, and they'd say, well, you take some stuff and you apply some energy and so forth. But none of this is in any of the economists' equations. I can't say any, but in the basic economics equations. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Now, I've asked to give only 12 slides. I, in fact, have more, but cheer up there because they're mostly just fun. So how do I do this? Do you have a clicker? What do I do? So, subtract this from my time. Oh, and I'm stepping on the microphone.
Keep going.
Here we are. You know, we're not going to run out of oil. It's the second half of the age of oil. Now, if you took a look at the production of the global GDP and you looked at our use of coal and oil and gas and other kinds of energy and our renewables up on the top, the things that I guess are going to save us, it's the correlation, you don't have to do a lot of statistics to see the correlation's pretty high, maybe getting a little bit more efficient, maybe not. But it's certainly, we don't live in an information age, we don't live in a post-industrial age, we live in an oil or a petroleum age, right? The US now and the world runs about 2/3 on petroleum, the same ratio it did in 1973. We haven't changed that at all. And of course, we all know the Hubbard curves. This is from Colin Campbell. And we've made a lot of predictions, John Halleck's work. We made these back in, you can see a faint white line in about 2001. It doesn't show up very well here. But we made these predictions as to what Hubbard curve might look like, and this happens to be UK, if we had a low ultimate amount of oil, EUR, a medium and a high, based on the USGS study of the year 2000. And we've, you can see here that the UK follows even slightly below the EUR estimate, the low estimate of oil. And we've done this now for all oil-producing countries, and with the very few exceptions, they're all following the low estimates. That oil isn't out there. The low estimates, as we've been getting from ASPO, as we've been getting from Colin Clark, as we've been getting from Jean Larrea, are the only ones that are consistent with reality. How long does it take for that to sink in? The rest of the world. Okay, my thing is EROI. I have to talk briefly about that. And this was my doctoral student under Howard Odom at the University of North Carolina. And I was an ecologist, still am an ecologist, and I looked at the energy cost that a fish would use to go from one place to another. And then I looked at the gain it would get from being in ecosystems of different productivity at different parts of their life history. And I sat on that rock right there in the foreground and came up with the concept of energy return on investment, which is very simply energy delivered to society and over energy put into that activity. The concept is very simple. The devil is in the details, the boundaries, which boundaries should you use, and so forth. Now, I just want to give you some pictures. Now, this is not a very large energy investment. Now, it's also phony because they say that the first oil well was made by Colonel Drake in Pennsylvania. Actually, the Chinese did it 4,000 years ago. But in North America, the first real oil well was done in Ontario, and Charlie Fairbanks here is of that lineage. And it's fantastic because you'd see over in the corner, the far corner there, some steps that you jump up and down on. And this is how you drilled for oil back in 1860. So for me, it's a fair amount of energy, but not a lot compared to what we're going to look at. And I want to say, Charlie, that when I did that, I didn't get any oil at all. And then we had Spindletop. That's pretty good times. You know, poke a hole in the ground and you get a Spindletop worth of oil. And this is what we have to do now, folks. And there isn't any iron anywhere near Louisiana. So you think about the energy cost of making that bloody thing. And there's Thunder Horse. That's our great hope for the America, if you don't worry about water cut. And, you know, this happened. And all the other stuff that Tad's written about, the beautiful book out there that Tad has on the Springer account on the Gulf of Mexico, oil spill, et cetera. So all of this is part of getting oil now. And it even goes way back. This is what we used to get for oil, the size of the field. So we're going after crumbs. All this stuff everybody's excited about, that the Wall Street Journal is excited about, that the New York Times is excited about, are crumbs. Not even very good crumbs. Now, we have done energy return on investment for especially all over the world now. Most governments don't keep good data, and that's the big thing we face. We have to pressurize governments and ideally industries to maintain good data, because without good data, we have no clue what's going on. But Norway does a good job. And here's production of oil, gas, which has peaked, gas and some other stuff condensates from the Norwegian fields. We have new data, and it's gone down further. But this is Leanna, my colleague Leanna Grandel's work, and this is the energy that we put into the Norwegian fields. And so this is the energy return on oil from our best oil field we have discovered since 1970, or oil region, play, whatever it is. So the red is energy return on investment from oil, which went through its own kind of a Hubbard curve, as they all do, and peaked, and we're now to about half the peak, and the total oil and gas is the top curve. So this is why I keep saying over and over at these meetings, you can't talk about technology without talking about the energy cost of that technology. And when you do that, that's a game changer. The U.S. is a little more complicated. You look at the heavy red oil, it's the heavy red line. You have, again, a kind of a Hubbard curve increasing, reaching a peak and going down. But there was a dip. We became a lot less efficient in 1980. And why is that? That's when we drilled, or more generally exploited more heavily than we do normally, and we're doing that again. The energy return on investment, this is pretty decent data for the U.S. is dropping like a stone. If it keeps doing that for a decade or two, then forget it. Takes a barrel of oil to get a barrel of oil. Tell me how that's an economic success. We don't know if this is going to happen, but we better keep our eyes open. And so when politicians say, drill, baby, drill, you say, well, wait a minute. When you drill a lot, it's just like fishing. When you fish hard, you get less per effort. When you drill hard, you get... That's how I came up with the idea. I'd just given my fisheries lecture in my ecology course when Cutler Cleveland came to me with this data. And I said, whoa, look at this. So anyway, how can we improve EROI? We can reduce effort. Sell that on Wall Street. Here's for a bunch of places in the world. That's Norway on the top. That's a really good oil field because it's new, and it's a good oil field. The U.S., different estimates are in the different colors, bouncing around from 1919 to 2008. And the green is one we did for all publicly traded oil companies. All of these are in peer-reviewed publications. Now, what are some of the economic consequences of these things? Economics is usually considered a social science, but the foundation of real economies, not economics, real economies is biophysical. If you ask people what does economics mean to them personally, it's usually food on the table, a roof over their head. It's stuff. Why is economics a social science? Where the hell did we get that idea? Who? Okay. So, I just would like to make the case that economics should be equally a biophysical science. And obviously, we're trying to go ahead with that. So, understanding the role of energy in economies, i.e. what we call biophysical economics, and we have a whole group of people doing that, and so forth and so on. Here are some important points about that. As opposed to conventional neoclassical economics that we teach to 1 million young people a year, a set of fairy tales as if they were truth. Number one, biophysical economics, or this approach to economics, is consistent with known scientific laws. I don't know anywhere else that scientific laws are invalidated or not followed except economics. 2, they make sense of history. 3, gives lie to indefinite growth. 4, explains the residual in Cobb-Douglas equations. Cobb-Douglas equations done by Dennison and others examine the increase in productivity, economic productivity over time, and they use as inputs only capital and labor. And so, what? When you do that, they have about 50% of the data is unexplained. The economists attribute that to creativity, to technological advance. However, when my colleague Rainer Kummel puts this information into the same Cobb-Douglas equations, or later modifications of that, the residual disappears. And energy is more important than capital or labor. I pointed this out to Dennison and many other economists. They don't want to hear it. We'll just leave it at that. Failure of the Phillips curve, all kinds of economic stuff that the neoclassical economists cannot explain are easy, trivial to explain from an energy perspective. And gives an absolute limit to market solutions. And let's talk about one specific way we'll do that. The economists, I've heard it at least 4 times today, will argue that should scarcity come to the oil patch, the price will go up, giving incentives to go get more or develop the technology to do so. Well, as I said this morning, anytime you increase your dollar investment to get the next barrel of oil, you're increasing your energy investment. At some point, looking at that decline in EROI, it takes you a barrel of oil to get a barrel of oil. Well, I think when you have to stop drilling, when you have to stop producing oil, is long before that. Kerry King and I have wrestled with this. Where are you, Kerry? And we're not sure we understand this exactly, but looks like in an EROI about 5 to 1, a business can't make a profit because they sell high energy density per dollar stuff, and by using low energy density per dollar Schlumberger stuff to get it. If anybody wants to talk about it, I'll talk about it some more. So what is economics? Now, the economists say it's the study of the allocation of scarce resources among competing ends. But this is what scarce resources means to an economist. It's the money in your wallet. It's not oil or water or soil or all the stuff that any rational person would consider to be resources. Now, there's a much better definition of economics. Economics is a study of how people transform nature to meet their needs, by Polanyi. And if you go ahead, neoclassical economics that dominates our life, in my opinion, is just a tool for exploitation. I don't mean that politically, but, no, I might mean that politically. Is only one of many possible forms of economics. So my book that I wrote with Kent Klitgard, he's an economic historian, he really pointed that out to me. There are many, many things that economics is. So here's a standard view of inputs and outputs to a U.S. economy. Capital, labor, and GDP output. This is for 1990. The question mark shouldn't be there. They're about right. And this is a social definition of economics. It's only relative scarcity. Humans are rational. You know, all these things that are just not true. Yeah. And an equally legitimate view. This is what an economy is. The same boundaries. One person for 1 year in 1990. So to run the U.S. economy for 1 year requires 2,500 kilograms of oil, 3,000 of coal, et cetera, 140,000 kilograms of water, all that stuff. And the output is not just GDP, CO2, particulates, SOx, NOx, all kinds of other stuff too. That's what our economy is. It's about stuff. Now, I'm going to end up with this little diagram. Some of you have seen this before. This is our cheese slicer diagram. And if you look at the black box, that's our economy. Certainly is a black box if you talk to an economist. And what we're looking at is the output of GDP as 100%, and that's coming out, we call it cheese, so the economy is making cheese and pushing it out. I guess it's going this way. And it's divided into investments or consumption. And this is in dollars, and this is just using data until 2007. And so you look at investments you have to invest into energy or your economy stops. The Cubans found that out in 1988. You have to have energy or your economy stops. You have to invest into infrastructure maintenance or your bridges fall in the Mississippi River. Then you have discretionary investments. That's what everybody likes. That's investing in a new hotel or a new oil, not a new oil field, but a new movie theater or whatever. And then you have consumption, and it's staples, food, shelter, and clothing, minimum needed for a family. And then the two red diagrams are discretionary. Discretionary consumption, that's what would go into a movie or whatever, and discretionary investments. So now here's 1970. So look at 1970, look at the top blue arrow, the energy, the money going into getting energy, and what happened in 1981. You see the blue gets big, the red gets small. At least the red investments get small. So when you have an increase in the amount of energy you need to get energy because the energy return on investment is going down, it has to come from somewhere, and usually where it comes from is discretionary spending. And when that happens to discretionary spending, your economy stops growing. That's David Murphy's paper I talked about earlier. It's beautifully analyzed. And also, you know, Rubin and Hamilton and others have talked about this. 1990, 2007, things have kind of settled down. The energy's not quite so expensive. Well, it's ticking up a little, but if you project this into the future, you see that top blue arrow gets more and more, and then you go to 2050, and maybe all of the energy that we have, or a majority, is going to go just to get the energy to run the rest of society. I don't think it's probably going to be this grim, but it could be. It's certainly going to have major constrictions on what we can do in our economy. And so I end with this diagram. Here's a sort of a rough Hubbard curve. And most of our economic and financial theories were derived on the left-hand side of the curve. And you can come up with any cockamamie economic idea, like neoclassical economics, and say, we've got the equations that show you how it works. Oh boy, it works real well. And there's more oil's pumped out of the geologists are doing their work, the engineers are doing their work, there's more oil. Well, guess what? You're going to have an increase in economic production, whether or not you got an economist watching it or not. But if you haven't noticed, our economic and financial projections are having a little trouble these days. And so we're wobbling around on the top of this Hubbard curve. What economic theories are appropriate here? Who's figuring that out? A few greenies off in the jungles, you know, trying to get at this or something, but we got some serious thinking to do about the future, and that's a plug for my book. And for David Packer in general, I hope you're here, David, and he's really there to help all of us with our energy stuff. Anybody have an idea for a book, let me know. And that's my final professional goal, to roll this boulder off the cliff. And that's it.